The blood-red sun hung low over the horizon as Elijah Foster slowed his mare at the edge of Bismarck, North Dakota, dust from the trail still clinging to his weathered denim and leather. It was 1878, and the Dakota Territory was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. His sharp eyes caught movement in the fading light, a slight figure stumbling along the outskirts of town. Something clutched tightly to her chest. When she collapsed to her knees near a stand of cottonwoods, Elijah's instincts kicked in, spurring his horse forward before his mind could catch up to his actions. "Madam," he called out, dismounting with practiced ease, his spurs jingling softly against the hard, packed earth. "Are you all right?" The woman's head snapped up, revealing a face that, despite being marred by a purple bruise blooming beneath one eye, possessed a haunting beauty. Wild auburn hair framed her delicate features, and her green eyes were wide with fear. But what struck Elijah most was the tiny bundle in her arms, a baby, no more than a few months old, whimpering softly. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please don't tell him where I am." Elijah crouched beside her, careful to move slowly. "I don't know who him is, madam, but you're safe with me." He offered his canteen. "I'm Elijah Foster. Most folks just call me Ellie." She accepted the water with trembling hands. "Violet," she murmured after taking a small sip. "Violet Vaughan, and this is James, my son." As she shifted to make herself more comfortable, the loose cotton of her dress slipped slightly, revealing angry purple and yellow bruises marking her back. Elijah's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. He'd seen enough in his 30 years to recognize the handiwork of a cruel man. "Miss Vaughan, you need a doctor," he said gently. Violet clutched her baby tighter. "No, no doctors. They'll tell him. He'll find us." Tears welled in her eyes. "He said he'd kill us both if I ever left." Elijah's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip. "Who, Miss Vaughan?" "My husband," she whispered, as though saying the word might summon the man himself. "George Maddox." The name hit Elijah like a physical blow. George Maddox was known throughout the Dakota Territory, a wealthy cattle baron with powerful friends and a mean streak as wide as the Missouri River. The man owned half the businesses in Bismarck and had the law in his pocket. Elijah made his decision in an instant. "Can you ride?" Violet looked up at him, confusion and hope battling in her expression. "Yes, but I have a cabin. About 2 days' ride west of here. It's not much, but it's hidden in the foothills. No one would find you there." He paused. "If you want, that is. I'm not forcing you to come with me, but I can promise you and your boy will be safe." Violet studied him with an intensity that made him feel as though she was seeing right through to his soul. "Why would you help us? You don't know me." Elijah thought about his own mother, how she died at his father's hands when he was just a boy. "Let's just say I know what it's like to need someone to step in, and I know what happens when nobody does." She nodded slowly, decision made. "We don't have anything. I just grabbed James and ran." "You don't need anything," Elijah assured her, standing and offering his hand. "I've got food, shelter, and no one to answer to for miles around. The only thing I can't promise is how long it'll be safe. Maddox isn't the type to let what he considers his property go." "We're not his property," Violet said, a flash of steel entering her voice that surprised Elijah. "Not anymore." With gentle hands, Elijah helped her onto his mare, passing little James up to her once she was settled. The baby had quieted, staring up at Elijah with wide, curious eyes. "I'll walk alongside. We'll head out of town on the north road, then cut west once we're clear of prying eyes." Violet adjusted her son in her arms. "Thank you, Mr. Foster." "Illy," he corrected her with a small smile. "Just Illy." As they moved away from Bismarck, Elijah kept a vigilant eye on their surroundings. Night was falling fast, and with it came a chill that had Violet shivering despite the woolen blanket he'd wrapped around her shoulders. They would need to make camp soon. Traveling at night with a baby wasn't wise, but he wanted to put as much distance between them and town as possible. The plains stretched endlessly around them, bathed in the silver glow of a rising moon. Stars began to pepper the vast Dakota sky, more than most city folk had ever seen in their lives. To Elijah, it was home. To Violet, he suspected, it was terrifyingly open after living in Maddox's grand house in town. "There's a creek about a mile ahead," he said, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. "We can stop there for the night. I've got jerky and hardtack in my saddlebags." "Not much of a meal, but it'll keep you going," Violet nodded. "I'm not picky. Anything is better than—" She stopped herself, but Elijah could fill in the blanks. "Was it always bad?" he asked softly. She was quiet for so long that Elijah thought she might not answer. "No," she finally said. "He was charming at first. My father had died and we were struggling. George offered security, respectability. He was already important in town, 15 years older than me, but that seemed like a good thing then." She looked down at James. "After we married, he changed. Or maybe he just stopped hiding who he really was. It got worse after James was born." "Some men can't stand not being the center of attention," Elijah observed, "even from their own wives. He said James made me soft, made me forget my place." Violet's voice was barely audible over the gentle night sounds. "Last night was the worst it's ever been. I thought he might kill me this time. When he finally passed out from the whiskey, I took James and ran." Elijah's hand tightened around the mare's reins. "You did the right thing." "Did I?" Doubt crept into her voice. "I have no money, no family. I'm trusting a stranger with my life and my son's. For all I know, you could be worse than George." "I could be," Elijah acknowledged. "But I'm not. And sometimes, Miss Vaughan, a stranger is safer than the devil you know." They reached the creek as the moon climbed higher in the sky. Elijah helped Violet down, careful not to touch her back where he knew the bruises lay hidden beneath her dress. He efficiently set up a small camp, building a fire just large enough to ward off the night chill, but not so large as to be visible from a distance. Violet sat near the fire, nursing baby James beneath the blanket while Elijah prepared a simple meal. He kept his back turned, affording her what privacy he could. "He's a handsome boy," Elijah commented when she had finished, and James was sleeping peacefully in her arms. "How old?" 4 months, she answered, a tender smile transforming her face as she gazed down at her son. "Sometimes I think he's the only good thing George ever gave me." Elijah handed her a tin plate with jerky and hardtack. "Children have a way of bringing out the best in some folks and the worst in others. You speak like a man who knows something about it." Violet studied him curiously. "Do you have children, Mr. Foster? A wife waiting at this cabin of yours?" Elijah shook his head. "No wife, no children, just me, my horses, and a few head of cattle." "Then why a cabin large enough for more than one person?" Elijah poked at the fire with a stick. "Built it with my brother Thomas. We had plans to build a proper ranch together, but he died 3 years ago, influenza." "I'm sorry," Violet said softly. "Life out here is hard," Elijah replied simply. "You either make your peace with death or you head back east." He looked up at her. "What about you? Will you go back east once Maddox is no longer a threat?" Violet's expression clouded. "I have nowhere to go. My mother died when I was young. My father was all I had, and when he passed, George seemed like salvation." She stroked James's cheek with gentle fingers. "I suppose I'll need to find work somewhere, a town where no one knows me." "There's time to figure it out," Elijah assured her. "For now, get some rest. I'll take first watch." Despite her exhaustion, Violet seemed reluctant to sleep. "What if he follows us?" George has men who are loyal to him. Hunters. We left no trail to follow, Elijah assured her, though he knew a determined man with resources could find almost anyone in time. And I know these lands better than most. Sleep, Violet. You'll need your strength tomorrow. Finally, she relented, curling protectively around her son on the bedroll Elijah had laid out for her. Within minutes, her breathing deepened, the tension leaving her body for the first time since he'd encountered her. Elijah settled against his saddle, rifle across his lap, and watched the darkness beyond their small circle of firelight. He wasn't a man given to rash decisions. His life had been carefully ordered since Thomas died peaceful if lonely. Now he'd invited a woman and infant into his world, along with the dangerous man who would surely come looking for them. But watching Violet sleep, the bruises stark against her pale skin, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth protecting. Dawn broke with a chorus of birdsong and the gentle babbling of the creek. Elijah, who had eventually dozed off in the early morning hours, awoke to find Violet already up, washing James's swaddling cloths in the creek water. "You should have woken me," he said, stretching his stiff muscles. Violet glanced up, the morning light illuminating her auburn hair with golden highlights. "You needed the rest as much as I did." Elijah built up the fire and put coffee on to boil. "We should reach the foothills by nightfall if we make good time. The cabin's another half-day beyond that." "I've never been so far from town," Violet admitted, bringing the damp cloths back to dry by the fire. James was awake in a nest of blankets, contentedly staring at a hawk circling above them. "It's different out there," Elijah said. "Quieter. The loudest thing you'll hear most days is the wind in the pines." "It sounds wonderful," Violet murmured. "Peaceful." They ate a quick breakfast of more hardtack softened in coffee, then packed up camp. Elijah insisted that Violet continue to ride the mare while he walked alongside. The day grew hot as the sun climbed higher, the vast Dakota plains stretching endlessly before them. Occasionally, Elijah would point out landmarks or tell stories of his years in the territory, and Violet would listen with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed a quick mind. By midday, they had left the well-traveled trails behind, cutting across open country toward the distant smudge of mountains on the horizon. Elijah kept a wary eye out for signs of pursuit, but the land behind them remained empty. "Tell me about your family," Violet said as they stopped to water the horse and rest in the shade of a lone cottonwood. "You mentioned a brother, but what about your parents?" Elijah was silent for a moment, considering how much to share. "My father was a drunk, mean sort. My mother tried to shield us from the worst of it, but he trailed off. One night when I was 10 and Thomas was 12, he came home especially drunk and angry. Something had happened at the saloon cards, most likely. He started beating her worse than usual. Thomas tried to stop him." "What happened?" Violet asked softly. "My father threw Thomas against the stove so hard it cracked his skull. Then he just kept hitting my mother until she stopped moving." Elijah's voice was flat, emotionless. "I was hiding under the bed, too scared to help, too scared to even breathe." Violet reached out, her small hand covering his. "You were just a child. Thomas survived. Mother didn't." Elijah met Violet's gaze. "Father went to prison and we went to an orphanage. Ran away when I was 15. Been on my own ever since, except for the years Thomas and I rode together." "Is that why you helped us?" Violet asked. "Because of your mother," Elijah nodded slowly. "I saw the bruises on your back when you sat down, saw the fear in your eyes, couldn't just ride on by, not again." They resumed their journey in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, the landscape gradually changed. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills, and in the distance, the dark line of forests marked the beginning of the foothills. "We'll make camp in that copse of trees," Elijah decided, pointing to a stand of aspens about a quarter-mile ahead. "It's more sheltered, and there's likely to be game nearby for fresh meat." They made camp with practiced efficiency, Violet tending to James while Elijah secured the perimeter. True to his word, he returned an hour later with 2 rabbits, which he skillfully cleaned and spitted over the fire. As they ate the hot, fresh meat, the first real meal they'd had since leaving Bismarck, Elijah noticed Violet wincing as she shifted position. "Your back's paining you," he observed. She nodded reluctantly. "It's worse today. The riding, I think. I've got a salve in my saddlebags, good for bruises and such. Made it myself from yarrow and comfrey." Color rose in Violet's cheeks. "I couldn't ask you to. You can put it on yourself," Elijah assured her quickly. "Just saying it might help." He retrieved a small tin from his bags and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Elijah was surprised by the jolt it sent through him. Violet must have felt it too, for her eyes widened slightly before she looked away. "Thank you," she murmured. "For everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did." "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Violet said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most men would have looked the other way, or worse, taken me straight back to George." Elijah didn't argue the point. He'd seen enough of the world to know she was right. "Get some rest. I'll take first watch again." Later, after Violet had applied the salve and settled with James for the night, Elijah sat with his back against a tree, watching the stars emerge one by one. The baby's occasional soft noises and Violet's steady breathing were the only sounds besides the gentle rustling of leaves in the night breeze. This strange new responsibility should have felt like a burden, but somehow it didn't. Instead, there was an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since Thomas died. It was dangerous, he knew, to let himself care too much. Violet and her son wouldn't stay forever, couldn't stay forever. Once the threat of Maddox was dealt with, however that might happen, she would move on, find a new life somewhere else. Still, as he watched her sleeping form in the flickering firelight, Elijah allowed himself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like if she stayed. Morning brought with it a light mist that cloaked the landscape in soft, diffuse light. They broke camp early, eager to reach the cabin before nightfall. The terrain grew steadily more challenging as they climbed into the foothills, but Elijah's mare was sure-footed, carrying Violet and James safely over the rocky paths. "It's beautiful," Violet remarked as they crested a rise that offered a panoramic view of the land they'd crossed. Behind them lay the vast expanse of prairie, and ahead the rugged embrace of the mountains. "It is," Elijah agreed. "Changed my life the first time I saw it. Thomas and I had been drifting for years, working cattle drives, breaking horses, whatever paid. Then we came through these hills and just stopped. Knew we'd found home. I've never had that," Violet admitted. "That feeling of belonging somewhere." "Maybe you will," Elijah said, not quite looking at her. "Someday." They continued on, the trail narrowing as they entered a dense pine forest. The air was cooler here, fragrant with the scent of evergreen and wild mint. Occasionally, they would startle deer or catch glimpses of smaller forest creatures going about their business. For Violet, who had never ventured far from town, it was a revelation. "There it is," Elijah said finally, as they emerged from the trees into a small, sheltered valley. "Home." The cabin sat nestled against a rocky outcropping, partially shielded from view by a stand of tall pines. It was larger than Violet had expected, a solidly built structure of logs and stone with a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. "Someone's there," Violet said, alarm edging into her voice. "Martha," Elijah explained quickly. "Martha Red Hawk. She comes by once a week to check on things when I'm away. Widow from the Lakota reservation about 10 miles east. Known her for years." As they approached, the cabin door opened and an elderly native woman stepped onto the porch. Her face was deeply lined, her long silver hair braided down her back, but she stood straight and proud. "Elijah Foster," she called, her accent slight but noticeable. "3 days you say you gone for supplies. It has been 7. "Got delayed, Martha," he called back, a smile warming his features. "Brought company." Martha's dark eyes took in Violet and the baby with shrewd assessment. "I see that. Good thing I make stew." Elijah helped Violet down from the horse, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. "Martha Red Hawk, this is Violet Vaughan and her son, James. They'll be staying with me for a while." If Martha was surprised by this announcement, she didn't show it. She simply nodded and gestured them inside. "Come, eat, then tell me what trouble follows you." The interior of the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A solid wooden table with benches occupied the center of the room, and various animal hides and woven blankets added warmth to the rustic furnishings. 2 doors led off to what Violet assumed were bedrooms. "It's wonderful," she breathed, taking it all in. "It's not much," Elijah said modestly, "but it keeps out the rain." "More than rain you worry about now," Martha observed, ladling thick venison stew into wooden bowls. "Sit, eat, then talk." They did as instructed, and Violet realized how truly hungry she was. The stew was rich and flavorful, with chunks of meat, wild onions, and forest mushrooms. James slept peacefully in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a wooden box lined with soft furs Martha's doing. Elijah explained. When they had eaten, Martha fixed Elijah with an expectant look. "Now, what woman with bruises and baby brings to your door? Who hunts her?" Elijah explained the situation in straightforward terms, neither softening the truth nor embellishing it. Martha listened without interruption, her weathered face revealing nothing of her thoughts. "George Maddox," she said when he had finished. "Bad man. Indians know this. He takes land not his, kills those who speak against him." "That's why I brought them here," Elijah said. "No one knows about this place except you and a handful of others I trust with my life." Martha nodded slowly. "Good hiding place, for now." She turned to Violet. "But a man like Maddox, he does not forget, does not forgive. He will search until he finds what he believes is his." "I'm not his," Violet said firmly, her green eyes flashing. "Neither is my son." "No," Martha agreed. "But he does not see this truth. Men like him never do." She stood, gathering her things. "I go now. Return in 3 days with herbs for the bruises, clothes for the child." "You don't have to do that, Martha," Elijah protested. The old woman fixed him with a stern look. "I do what I choose, Elijah Foster. Always have." She paused at the door. "Be careful. Watch the ridgeline at sunrise and sunset, first place they will come from." After Martha left, Elijah showed Violet around the cabin. "You and James can take my room," he said, opening the door to a simply furnished bedroom with a large bed covered in quilts. "I'll sleep in Thomas's old room or out here by the fire." "I can't take your bed," Violet protested. "You've already done so much." "It's no hardship," Elijah insisted. "Besides, it's the only proper bed. The other room just has a cot." Reluctantly, Violet agreed. While she settled James in the bedroom, Elijah brought in their few belongings and started preparing the cabin for potential trouble. He checked his ammunition supply. made sure the shutters could be securely fastened, and filled extra water barrels from the nearby spring. When Violet emerged from the bedroom, he was cleaning his rifle at the table. "Will they really come looking for us all the way out here?" she asked. "Maybe not right away," Elijah answered honestly, "but eventually. Maddox has too much pride to let you go without a fight." "I'm sorry I've brought this to your doorstep." Elijah looked up at her. "Don't be. I made my choice when I offered to help you. I knew what I was getting into." "Did you?" Violet asked softly. "Did you really?" Their gazes held for a long moment before Elijah looked away. "Get some rest. You're safe tonight." Violet hesitated, then retreated to the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. Elijah continued his preparations late into the night, trying not to think about the woman and child sleeping under his roof, trying not to imagine a future where they might stay. Such thoughts were dangerous, he knew. He'd learned long ago that hoping for too much only led to disappointment. Better to focus on the present, on keeping them safe, until Maddox was no longer a threat. After that, after that would take care of itself. The days fell into a rhythm of domestic simplicity that Elijah had never expected to experience. Violet proved herself remarkably capable, quickly learning the routines of cabin life. She cooked meals that made his plain fare seem like hardtack by comparison, tended a small garden Martha had started years ago, and kept the cabin cleaner than it had been since it was built. More surprising was how quickly James took to him. The baby would light up whenever Elijah entered the room, reaching out with tiny hands that grabbed at his beard with surprising strength. Against his better judgment, Elijah found himself growing attached to the child, spending evenings bouncing him on his knee or telling him stories about the mountains as if the infant could understand. "He likes your voice," Violet observed one evening as Elijah walked James around the cabin, the baby having been fussy all afternoon. "He's never taken to anyone like that before." "Probably just the novelty," Elijah demurred. "He'll tire of me soon enough." Violet's expression softened. "I don't think so. Children know good souls when they meet them." The comment left Elijah feeling both pleased and unsettled. He wasn't used to such open appreciation, especially from a woman as lovely as Violet. As the days passed, the bruises on her face and back had faded, revealing more of her natural beauty. Her auburn hair, now free of tangles and dirt, shone in the sunlight, and her green eyes had lost much of their haunted look. Sometimes he would catch her watching him as he worked around the cabin or tended the small herd of cattle in the valley below. Her gaze would linger a moment too long, then dart away when he noticed, color rising in her cheeks. It stirred feelings in him that he'd long thought dormant or perhaps had never truly felt before. True to her word, Martha returned 3 days later with herbs for Violet's remaining bruises, clothes for James that she'd traded for with women on the reservation, and news from Bismarck. "Maddox offers reward," she reported grimly as they sat around the table. $500 for information leading to wife and child. Claims she stole family heirlooms, ran off with lover. "That's a lie," Violet said, outraged. "I took nothing but James." "Truth matters little to such men," Martha replied. "Story serves his pride, makes him victim, not villain." "Has anyone started looking yet?" Elijah asked, his mind already calculating risks and contingencies. Martha nodded. 2 men rode out yesterday. Heading south, thinking you went toward Wyoming territory. That buys us time, Elijah mused. But not much. Someone will eventually point them this way. What do we do? Violet asked, unconsciously moving closer to James, who was sleeping in his improvised cradle. For now, we stay vigilant, Elijah decided. Keep watch, be prepared. I know every trail and hiding spot in these hills. If they come, we'll see them long before they see us." That night, after Martha had gone and Violet had retired to the bedroom with James, Elijah sat alone by the fire, cleaning his guns and thinking. The situation was growing more complicated by the day, and not just because of Maddox's men. His feelings for Violet were becoming harder to ignore, and he suspected, or perhaps just hoped, that she felt something similar. But what future could they possibly have together? Even if they somehow dealt with Maddox, Violet deserved better than a solitary life in a remote cabin with a man who barely knew how to express his own feelings. She deserved a proper home in a real town, where James could go to school someday and have friends his own age. Elijah was so lost in thought that he almost didn't hear the bedroom door open. Violet stepped into the main room, wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts that she'd taken to wearing as a nightdress. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and in the firelight, she looked almost ethereal. "I thought you'd be asleep," he said, setting aside his revolver. "I couldn't," she admitted, coming to sit beside him on the bench. "Too many thoughts." They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. It was Violet who finally spoke. "What happens after?" she asked softly. "When Maddox is no longer a threat, however that comes to pass, what then?" Elijah considered his words carefully. "That would depend on what you want, Violet. You'd be free to go wherever you choose, start fresh. And if I didn't want to leave?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Elijah turned to look at her, finding her eyes already on him. "Are you saying you'd want to stay, here in this cabin in the middle of nowhere?" "I'm saying I've never felt safer or more at peace than I have these past weeks," Violet replied. "I'm saying that James loves it here, loves you, and I'm saying that I—" She faltered, then gathered her courage. "I think I could be happy here with you if you wanted us." Elijah's heart hammered against his ribs. "Violet, I'm not a man of many words or grand gestures. I live simply. I can't offer you the kind of life Maddox could." "I never wanted that life," she said fiercely. "I never wanted fine dresses or fancy parties or servants. I wanted safety, respect, kindness." Her hand found his, warm and small against his calloused palm. "You've given me all of those things without asking anything in return." "You deserve more than kindness," Elijah said, his voice rough with emotion. "You deserve to be cherished." "Then cherish me," she whispered, leaning toward him. Their lips met in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened, years of Elijah's solitude and Violet's loneliness melting away in the heat between them. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I've wanted to do that since that first night by the creek," Elijah admitted. Violet smiled, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I've wanted you to since the moment you helped me onto your horse outside Bismarck." They might have said more, might have done more, but a sudden cry from the bedroom reminded them of James's presence. Violet reluctantly stood. "This conversation isn't over," she promised, squeezing his hand before going to tend to her son. Elijah watched her go, his body still humming with the feeling of her against him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope for a future that included more than just survival. A future with Violet and James as his family. But first, they had to deal with George Maddox. The peaceful routine of their life at the cabin was shattered 3 days later. Elijah had ridden out at dawn to check on the cattle in the high pasture, leaving Violet and James at the cabin with strict instructions to stay inside and keep the door barred. Martha was due to visit that afternoon with more supplies, and he planned to be back well before then. He was halfway back to the cabin when he saw the smoke. At first, he thought it might be Martha, arrived early and cooking something outside. But as he urged his horse up the last rise, his blood turned to ice. The smoke wasn't coming from a cooking fire, it was billowing from the cabin roof. Elijah spurred his horse into a gallop, heart pounding with terror. As he neared the cabin, he saw two unfamiliar horses tethered outside, and the front door hanging open on broken hinges. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, drawing his revolver as he hit the ground running. A man emerged from the cabin, coughing from the smoke, and Elijah recognized him as one of Maddox's ranch hands, a mean-spirited bully named Jenkins. "Where are they?" Elijah demanded, his voice deadly quiet as he aimed his gun at the man's chest. Jenkins froze, his hand hovering over his own holster. "Foster, shoulda known you'd be mixed up in this. Maddox said his wife might have had help." "I asked you a question," Elijah said, cocking the hammer. "Where are the woman and child?" A slow, ugly smile spread across Jenkins's face. "She's waiting for her husband to come collect her. Gave us a bit of trouble, that one. Had to teach her some manners." Before the man could say another word, Elijah fired. The bullet caught Jenkins in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground with a howl of pain. Elijah was on him in an instant, hauling him up by his shirt front. "Tell me where they are, or the next one goes through your heart," he growled. "Gareth's taking them back to Maddox," Jenkins gasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Left about 15 minutes ago. Heading east, taking the Ridge Trail." Elijah knocked the man unconscious with the butt of his revolver, then turned to assess the cabin. The fire was spreading quickly, but it was still mostly contained to the roof. He had to make a choice: try to save his home or go after Violet and James. It was no choice at all. He ran to his horse, mounted, and set off at a dangerous gallop toward the Ridge Trail. If Jenkins was telling the truth, he still had a chance to catch them before they got too far. The trail was treacherous, narrow, and winding along the top of a steep ridge, but it was the fastest way back toward Bismarck. A man on horseback with a woman and baby would have to take it slow. Elijah knew these hills better than anyone. Instead of following the main trail, he cut across country, taking a shortcut that would intercept the ridge path about 3 miles ahead. His horse, sensing his urgency, gave everything it had, surging up steep inclines and picking its way carefully down rocky slopes. As he rode, Elijah prayed as he hadn't since he was a child. Prayed that Violet and James were unharmed. Prayed that he would reach them in time. Prayed that he would have the strength to do what needed to be done. He heard them before he saw them, the slow plod of hooves on rocky ground, the murmur of a man's voice, and then, mercifully, the distinct sound of a baby's cry. Elijah dismounted, tethering his horse to a pine tree, and proceeded on foot, moving silently through the underbrush until he had a clear view of the trail. The man called Gareth was leading a horse on which Violet sat, James clutched tightly to her chest. Even from a distance, Elijah could see the fresh bruise blooming on her cheek and the way she held herself rigidly, as if in pain. Rage surged through him, hot and blinding, but he forced it down. He couldn't afford to lose control now. Gareth was armed, a revolver on his hip and a rifle in a scabbard on his saddle. He was a big man, at least 6 inches taller than Elijah and broader through the shoulders. A direct confrontation would be risky, especially with Violet and James so close. Elijah moved ahead of them, finding a bend in the trail where the ridge narrowed to its thinnest point. On one side was a sheer drop of at least 100 feet, on the other, a steep slope dotted with boulders and trees. It was the perfect place for an ambush. He positioned himself behind a large boulder, waiting until Gareth and Violet were almost upon him before he made his move. "That's far enough," he called out, stepping onto the trail with his revolver aimed steadily at Gareth's chest. The big man reacted instantly, dropping the horse's reins and reaching for his gun, but Elijah was faster. His first shot caught Gareth in the right arm, causing his draw to falter. His second grazed the man's side, spinning him halfway around. "Illy!" Violet cried, relief and fear mingling in her voice. "Get down from the horse and come to me," Elijah instructed, never taking his eyes off Gareth, who was now cursing and clutching his wounded arm. Violet slid awkwardly from the saddle. James held tight against her and began moving toward Elijah. Gareth, seeing his prize slipping away, lunged for her with his good arm. "You ain't going nowhere, woman," he snarled, grabbing her hair and yanking her backward. Violet screamed, nearly losing her grip on James, who began to wail in terror. It was the opening Elijah needed. He charged forward, slamming into Gareth with enough force to break his hold on Violet and send both men staggering toward the edge of the ridge. "Run, Violet," Elijah shouted as he grappled with the larger man. "Get to my horse." "Go." Gareth, despite his wounds, was incredibly strong. He landed a solid blow to Elijah's ribs that drove the air from his lungs, then followed it with an elbow to the jaw that sent Elijah reeling. Elijah countered with a knee to the man's injured side, drawing a howl of pain. They fought brutally, without restraint, each knowing that only one of them would walk away. Gareth's greater size and strength were matched by Elijah's speed and fierce determination. Rocks cut into their hands and faces as they rolled on the hard ground, each seeking advantage. Finally, Elijah managed to get his hand on his hunting knife, drawing it from his boot and slashing upward. The blade caught Gareth across the chest, not deep enough to kill but enough to make him rear back in shock and pain. The movement carried him too close to the edge of the ridge, where loose stones shifted under his weight for a moment. Time seemed to slow. Gareth's eyes widened in realization as he began to fall backward, arms windmilling for balance he couldn't find. He made a desperate grab for Elijah, catching his shirt and dragging him toward the precipice as well. Elijah twisted frantically, using Gareth's own momentum to spin them both. In the end, it was Gareth who went over the edge alone, his scream fading to nothing as he plummeted to the rocks below. Breathing heavily, bleeding from a dozen minor wounds, Elijah dragged himself away from the edge. He found Violet kneeling on the trail a few yards away. James clutched to her chest, her face white with fear. "Are you hurt?" he gasped, crawling toward her. "Not badly," she answered, her voice shaking. "James is fine, scared but fine." She reached for him with her free hand. "Oh, Illy, I thought, when I saw you fighting so close to the edge." He gathered her and James in his arms, holding them as if he might never let go. "It's over now." "You're safe." "The cabin," Violet said suddenly. "They set fire to it, all your things." "Just things," Elijah assured her. "All that matters is that you and James are all right." They made their way slowly back to Elijah's horse. Violet was limping slightly, and Elijah suspected she had injuries she wasn't telling him about. His own body ached from the fight, but he pushed the pain aside. They weren't out of danger yet. "We can't go back to the cabin," he said as he helped her onto the horse. "Even if the fire didn't destroy it, Maddox will know to look for us there now." "Where will we go?" Violet asked, cradling a now quiet James. Elijah mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist. "Martha's people, the Lakota reservation, it's our best option for now. And after that—" "One step at a time," Elijah murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "Let's get you somewhere safe first." The journey to the Lakota reservation took the rest of the day. They traveled cautiously, avoiding open ground and keeping to the shelter of trees whenever possible. James, exhausted by the day's events, slept for most of the journey, nestled against his mother's chest. Martha met them at the edge of the reservation, as if she had been waiting for them. Perhaps she had the old woman had always seemed to know things before they happened. "I saw the smoke," she said by way of greeting. "Feared the worst." "We're alive," Elijah replied simply, "but Maddox's men found us." Martha nodded gravely. "Come, my sister's lodge has room, you rest heal. Then we talk." The next few days passed in a blur of recovery and planning. The Lakota people, out of respect for Martha and their own dislike of Maddox, welcomed them with quiet dignity. Violet's injuries were treated with herbal poultices, and Elijah's cuts and bruises were tended with the same care. On the third day, as they sat outside Martha's sister's lodge watching the sunset, Elijah finally broached the subject they had been avoiding. "Maddox won't stop," he said quietly. "Not now that he knows where to look. Jenkins will have made it back to him by now with news of what happened to Gareth." Violet nodded, her face solemn. "What do we do?" Elijah had been thinking about this question constantly. "We have three choices," he said. "We can run head west to Oregon or California, start fresh where Maddox has no influence. We can stay and fight, though that's likely to end badly for all of us. Or what?" Violet prompted when he hesitated. "Or we can end this once and for all. Go to Maddox directly, on our terms, not his." Violet stared at him in shock. "You want to go to Bismarck? That's suicide." "Not if we do it right," Elijah argued. "Maddox is powerful because he operates in the shadows, because people are afraid to stand against him openly. But what if we forced everything into the light?" "How?" "The territorial marshal," Elijah explained. "Williams. He's a good man from what I've heard. Honest. And he answers to federal authorities, not local ones in Maddox's pocket." "You think he would help us?" Violet sounded skeptical. "I think if we presented him with evidence of Maddox's crimes, not just against you, but against others, he might." Elijah took her hand. "It's a risk, I won't pretend otherwise, but running forever is no life for you or James, and I'm tired of hiding." Violet was quiet for a long time, considering. "What evidence do we have?" she finally asked. "Your testimony. The bruises on your back, those old ones, were no accident. Martha says there are others who would speak up if given the chance, families driven from their land by Maddox's men, businesses burned for refusing to pay protection." Elijah squeezed her hand. "It won't be easy and it will be dangerous, but it might be our only chance at a real life, a life where we don't have to look over our shoulders every day." "Our life," Violet repeated softly. "You still want that, after everything I've brought down on you?" Elijah turned to face her fully. "Violet, I've never wanted anything more. If you'll have me, I want to build a life with you and James. A real life, not one in hiding." Tears filled her eyes. "Even though my husband is still alive, even though I'm still bound to him by law." "Laws can be changed," Elijah said firmly. "There are grounds for divorce in cases like yours, and once Maddox's true nature is exposed, no court would deny it." Violet leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Then we'll do it," she decided. "We'll go to Bismarck and face him together." The plan they developed over the next few days was risky but sound. Martha traveled to Bismarck first, making discreet inquiries and sending word to those who had suffered under Maddox's rule. The territorial marshal was indeed in town, investigating reports of corruption among local officials. Elijah and Violet would follow, timing their arrival to coincide with a town meeting the marshal had called. There, in front of the entire town, they would present their case against Maddox, backed by others who had been too afraid to speak out before. "It's a good plan," Martha said on the eve of their departure. "But Maddox is cornered animal now, most dangerous kind." "We'll be careful," Elijah promised, checking his revolver one last time before tucking it into his holster. They left at dawn, borrowing horses from Martha's people. "James, now more accustomed to traveling, was securely bundled against Violet's chest. They rode hard but cautiously, staying off the main trails until they were within a few miles of Bismarck. The town was busier than usual when they arrived, people gathering for the meeting at the courthouse. Elijah and Violet kept their heads down, making their way through back alleys until they reached the small boarding house where Martha was waiting for them. "Marshall is inside courthouse already," she reported. "Many people there. Maddox too with men." "How many?" Elijah asked. "4 with him. 2 by doors. Others watching streets." Elijah nodded grimly. It was what he had expected. "And our people, they wait for your signal, will stand when you stand." Everything was in place. Now they just had to execute the plan and hope it was enough. As they prepared to leave for the courthouse, Elijah took Violet's hands in his. "Whatever happens in there," he said softly, "know that these weeks with you and James have been the best of my life." Violet's eyes shimmered with tears. "They've been mine too." She reached up to touch his face. "Promise me something, anything. Promise me that when this is over, when we're free, you'll ask me properly to be your wife." Elijah's heart swelled with love and hope. "I promise." The courthouse was packed to capacity when they slipped in through a side door, Martha leading the way. They took positions at the back of the room, where they could observe without being immediately noticed. Marshal Williams was at the front, addressing the crowd about the importance of law and order in the growing territory. And there, in the front row, sat George Maddox, a handsome, well-dressed man whose outward appearance gave no hint of the cruelty he was capable of. Just the sight of him made Violet tremble, and Elijah placed a steadying hand on her back. "When the marshal asks for citizens to speak," he whispered, "that's our moment." They didn't have to wait long. After outlining his concerns about reports of corruption and intimidation in Bismarck, Williams opened the floor. "I'm here to listen to the people of this town," he announced. "If anyone has evidence of wrongdoing that the local law has failed to address, now is the time to step forward." A tense silence fell over the room. Despite the promises of protection, despite the presence of the federal marshal, fear still held many tongues. Maddox looked around with a smug smile, clearly believing that his reputation for retribution would keep everyone quiet. It was Elijah who moved first, stepping into the center aisle. "I have something to say, Marshal." All heads turned toward him. Maddox's face darkened with recognition and fury. "Foster," he spat, "you've got some nerve showing your face here after stealing my wife and child." "I stole nothing, Maddox," Elijah replied evenly. "I protected a woman and infant from a man who beat them and threatened their lives." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Maddox rose to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "That's a damned lie. My wife ran off with valuables from our home, probably planning to meet this man all along." It was then that Violet stepped forward, James held protectively in her arms. A collective gasp went up from the townspeople. Many of them knew Violet, had seen her at church or in the shops, always quiet, always with a ready explanation for the occasional bruise or limp. "I took nothing but my son when I fled," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I ran because George promised to kill us both if I ever tried to leave him." "The ramblings of a hysterical woman," Maddox scoffed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes now. "Marshal, this is a private family matter, not a federal concern." "Abuse and attempted murder are very much my concern, Mr. Maddox," Williams replied coolly. He gestured for Violet to continue. With quiet dignity, Violet recounted the years of abuse, the escalating violence, the threats against James. Then, in a move they had discussed, but Elijah still found breathtaking in its courage, She turned and lowered the back of her dress just enough to reveal the faded but still visible pattern of old bruises and scars. "These are what my husband gave me for the crime of asking him not to drink so much," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "For the crime of spending too long at the mercantile, for the crime of not having his dinner ready precisely when he wanted it." The room had gone deathly silent. Even Maddox's supporters looked uncomfortable now. "She's lying," Maddox insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Foster put her up to this, filled her head with nonsense." "I'm not the only one you've hurt, George," Violet continued as if he hadn't spoken. "And I'm not the only one who's going to speak today." As if on cue, others began to stand a shopkeeper whose store had been vandalized after he refused to pay protection money. A farmer whose land had been seized through fraudulent means. A young widow whose husband had died mysteriously after standing up to Maddox's men. One by one they told their stories, each more damning than the last. With each new voice, Maddox grew more agitated, looking to his men for support, but finding them increasingly unwilling to meet his gaze. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Maddox," Marshal Williams said when the last person had spoken. "I'm placing you under arrest pending a full investigation." "You can't do that," Maddox shouted, backing away as the marshal approached him. "I own this town. These people are nothing without me." His hand went to his jacket and Elijah tensed, recognizing the movement for what it was. "Gun!" he shouted, just as Maddox drew a small derringer from a hidden pocket. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Maddox, his face contorted with rage, aimed not at the marshal but at Violet, who stood frozen in horror. James clutched to her chest. Elijah lunged forward without thought, putting himself between them just as Maddox fired. The bullet struck Elijah in the shoulder, spinning him around but not knocking him down. Before Maddox could fire again, the marshal's deputies had subdued him, wrestling him to the ground and disarming him. "Illy," Violet cried, rushing to his side as he staggered against a bench. "Oh God, you're hit." "It's not bad," he assured her, though the burning pain suggested otherwise. "Just a shoulder wound. Are you and James all right?" "We're fine," she sobbed, touching his face with trembling fingers. "You saved our lives. Again." The next hours passed in a blur of statements and medical attention. The town doctor removed the bullet from Elijah's shoulder and pronounced him lucky an inch to the right, and it would have hit something vital. Maddox was locked in the jail, his protests falling on deaf ears as more and more people came forward with tales of his cruelty and corruption. By nightfall, Violet, Elijah, and James were settled in a room at the boarding house, under the protection of the marshal's deputies. The danger wasn't entirely past. Maddox still had allies who might seek revenge, but for the first time, the future seemed possible. "The marshal says there's more than enough evidence to send Maddox to prison for years," Violet reported, sitting beside Elijah on the narrow bed. "And he's agreed to sponsor my petition for divorce on grounds of cruelty." "That's good," Elijah murmured, still groggy from the laudanum the doctor had given him for pain. Violet stroked his hair back from his forehead. "You should rest. We can talk more in the morning." "No," Elijah said, forcing his eyes to focus on her face. "There's something I need to ask you first." "It can wait, Illy. You're injured. It's waited long enough." With his good arm, he reached for her hand. "Violet Vaughan, when all this is over, when you're free of Maddox forever, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you and James make a home with me, wherever that may be?" Tears spilled down Violet's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Elijah and Violet were married in a simple ceremony at the new cabin they had built together. It stood not far from where the old one had been, but on higher ground, with a view of the valley that stretched for miles. Martha Red Hawk was there, along with a handful of friends who had stood by them during the difficult months following Maddox's arrest and trial. George Maddox had been convicted of multiple counts of assault, intimidation, and attempted murder. The testimony against him had been overwhelming, and not even his money could save him from being sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. The divorce had been granted without contest, freeing Violet to begin her new life. James, now nearly a year old, sat contentedly on Martha's lap during the ceremony, babbling happily and reaching for the colorful strings of beads she wore. He had grown sturdy and strong in the months since their ordeal, his dark curls and bright eyes so reminiscent of his mother that it made Elijah's heart swell with pride and love. "I, Elijah Foster, take you, Violet Vaughan, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice clear and steady as they exchanged vows. "I promise to protect you, provide for you, and cherish you all the days of my life." "I, Violet Vaughan, take you, Elijah Foster, to be my lawfully wedded husband," she replied, her green eyes shining with joy. "I promise to stand by your side, share in your burdens, and love you with all my heart for as long as we both shall live." The simple gold bands they exchanged had been purchased with money from the sale of some of Maddox's property, which had been awarded to Violet as part of the divorce settlement. It seemed fitting somehow that the man who had brought them so much pain had unwittingly contributed to their happiness. That night, with James sleeping peacefully in his new room, Elijah and Violet stood on the porch of their cabin, wrapped in each other's arms as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "Are you happy, Mrs. Foster?" Elijah asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Violet answered, nestling closer against him. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find this has all been a dream." "Not a dream," Elijah assured her, "just the beginning of our story." And as they stood there, surrounded by the wilderness they both had come to love, Elijah reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter on the outskirts of Bismarck, a desperate woman with bruises on her back and a baby in her arms, to this. A family, a home, a love that had overcome every obstacle placed in its path. He had promised forever that day, not fully understanding what it meant. Now, holding Violet in his arms with their son sleeping safely nearby, Elijah knew that it wasn't just a promise. It was a gift, the greatest one he had ever received or given, and he intended to cherish it for all the days of his life. 5 years later, the Foster Ranch had grown from a modest cabin to a thriving homestead. 2 more bedrooms had been added to accommodate their growing family: 3-year-old Thomas, named for Elijah's brother, and 1-year-old Margaret, a tiny, fierce girl with her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady gaze. James, now 6, and showing all the signs of becoming as skilled a horseman as his adoptive father, was the pride and joy of them all. He had no memory of George Maddox, knew only that the man who had helped bring him into the world was not the man he called Pa. Elijah had formally adopted him the year after the wedding, making official what had been true in their hearts from the beginning. Violet had flourished in her freedom, developing a talent for breeding and training horses that complemented Elijah's cattle business. Together, they had built something neither could have imagined alone: a ranch respected throughout the territory, a home filled with love and laughter, a family bound not just by blood but by choice and devotion. The bruises that had once marred Violet's back had faded to nothing, leaving only the faintest traces that she was sometimes unaware of, until Elijah's fingers or lips would find them in the privacy of their bedroom. On those nights, He would whisper promises against her skin, each one a renewal of the vow he had made that first day, to protect her, to cherish her, to love her until his dying breath. They had heard that George Maddox had died in prison 3 years into his sentence, a fever that had swept through the cells, claiming several lives. Violet had received the news with quiet reflection rather than celebration, saying only that she hoped he had found peace in the end, something he had never seemed to have in life. It was on a warm summer evening, with the children playing in the yard under Martha's watchful eye, that Elijah found Violet standing on their porch, gazing out at the land they had nurtured together. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "What are you thinking about, love?" he asked. Violet leaned back against him, her hands covering his. "I was just remembering that day we met, how afraid I was, how desperate." "You were the bravest person I'd ever seen," Elijah murmured. "Still are." She turned in his arms to face him, her green eyes as captivating as they had been that first day. "Do you ever regret it, taking in a woman with bruises on her back and a baby in her arms?" Elijah smiled, cupping her face in his hands. "Not for a single moment. Best decision I ever made." Violet's answering smile was radiant. "Mine too." As the sun set over their land, casting long shadows across the fields they had planted together, they stood wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the laughter of their children. It was the sound of promise fulfilled, of forever unfolding one precious day at a time. And in that moment, both Elijah and Violet knew with absolute certainty that the journey that had begun in fear and desperation had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Home, in every sense of the word, with a love that would last far beyond forever.